The final days of summer always carry a silence that feels different from any other time of year. It's not the peaceful kind of silence that brings comfort. It's the kind that lingers, heavy and watchful, as if the world itself is holding its breath. The sun still shines, but its warmth feels weaker, more desperate, like it's fighting a losing battle against the coming dark. The wind moves slower, the nights grow longer, and you can almost sense the season slipping away, taking something unseen with it. People never notice it because they're too busy saying goodbye to their vacations, their friends, their freedom. But there's something ancient in that change, something that wakes when summer dies. It begins subtly. The laughter that once echoed across the neighborhood begins to fade earlier in the evening. The air smells different, the sweet scent of cut grass replaced by something colder, damp, almost metallic. You might tell yourself it's just the weather turning, just nature shifting its tone. But deep down it feels like something is waiting for the silence to grow. As if each sunset pulls the light a little further from this world, leaving just enough room for something else to slip in. You can feel it if you pay attention, the way the shadows seem to grow faster now, the way your reflection in the window looks just a second too long before it moves with you. The calm before the ending has always held a strange kind of power. It's the space between life and decay, warmth and cold, safety and fear. Maybe that's why people always tell stories during this time. Campfire tales, ghost whispers, the ones that make you look over your shoulder because some part of us knows that endings attract attention. When a season closes, when light fades, when the air grows still, it draws things closer, things that remember what used to live here before us. The end of summer is not just a change in time, it's a moment of weakness in the world, a tear between what's living and what's left behind. I remember once walking home late in August, the air thick and heavy with the last traces of heat. The street was empty, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. Not footsteps exactly, just presence. Soft, subtle, watching. Every sound carried too far. Every rustle of leaves felt intentional. When I turned around, there was nothing. But the strange part wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't. The world felt paused, like everything was waiting for me to move first. And when I finally did, the wind started again, almost relieved. Moments like that make you wonder if silence itself is alive, and if it's choosing when to let things breathe. You see, endings are never clean. They carry the residue of what came before them, and summer, with all its noise and chaos, doesn't go quietly. It drags pieces of itself into the shadows, laughter, warmth, memories, and leaves them there to rot. That's why the calm before autumn feels so unsettling. It's not really calm, it's the aftermath of something struggling to stay alive. It's the dying breath of warmth, the trembling silence before decay takes over. And when something dies, something else always takes its place. People love to think of summer as a time of life, sunlight, joy, freedom. But they forget what happens when that energy fades. That much light, that much laughter. It doesn't just disappear. Energy doesn't vanish. It transforms. Maybe that's why, every year, strange things start happening as summer ends. People go missing, animals act strangely, lights flicker without reason, the air hums in places it shouldn't. It's as if all the joy and noise we created for months doesn't know where to go. So it gathers, searching for a new host, and sometimes it finds one. Have you ever noticed how children become quiet around this time of year? How animals seem to stare into empty spaces? How your dreams start to change, filled with faces you don't remember meeting? Maybe those are the echoes of summer's last breath, the fragments of warmth that couldn't fade away peacefully. They linger in corners, in fields, in the still water of lakes that haven't yet frozen. And when night falls earlier, they begin to move, not maliciously at first, just wandering, confused, trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. But over time, that confusion turns into hunger. Because the end of summer doesn't just mean cold is coming. It means something that once basked in the light is now forced to live in the dark. There's a reason why, even in the middle of a warm evening, the last days of August can send a chill down your spine. It's not the temperature, it's the awareness, the subconscious realization that something is changing, something invisible but ancient. You can sense it in the way the sun dips lower, the way the cicadas scream louder as if protesting their own extinction. You can hear it in the pause between breezes, in the hush that settles before the storm. The world becomes quieter because it's listening for what comes next. The calm before the ending is deceptive. It makes you believe everything's peaceful when, in truth, everything's holding still out of fear. Trees stop moving, birds stop singing, even the air thickens, as if bracing itself. That stillness isn't peace, it's anticipation. It's the world waiting for the next shift, the next shadow, the next scream. And that's when it happens, every year, without fail. The first night when the air feels wrong, when the stars look sharper, when your reflection in the dark window seems to blink slower than you do. It's subtle, but once you notice, you can never unsee it. There's an old saying that the end of summer opens doors that should stay closed. Maybe that's why people used to celebrate harvest festivals, to distract themselves from what was really happening, to fill the air with noise so the silence couldn't breathe. But we don't make enough noise anymore. We sit inside our quiet homes, staring at glowing screens, pretending we're safe while the world outside shifts into something else. We've forgotten how to listen to the warnings, the wind that changes direction without cause, the sudden stillness of animals, the feeling that the night itself is watching us. Because when the season dies, the boundaries thin, the world becomes porous, and everything that's been waiting for an opening starts to crawl through. You might think it's superstition, just the imagination playing tricks on tired minds. But what if it isn't? What if the end of summer isn't just a turning of the calendar, but a resurrection of something much older than we understand? Maybe that's why we fear autumn nights so deeply, not for the cold they bring, but for what the warmth leaves behind. Every ending demands something in return. Every silence hides something that wants to be heard. And when you feel that heavy quiet pressing against your window, when the air outside feels alive but unseen, remember this: something always comes to collect the echoes of the season that just died. Because when summer ends, it doesn't fade. It waits. Every summer they return to the same lake house. It was a tradition that started long before they could remember. A ritual of escape from the noise of life, from cities that never slept, from memories that refused to fade. The lake was their sanctuary, still and endless, mirroring the skies above like a secret only nature could keep. It was the kind of place where laughter echoed through the trees, where the nights were filled with fireflies and the sound of the water lapping against the dock. Every year they'd promise each other one more perfect summer, one more week away from everything. But this time the lake wasn't the same. It looked the same, sure, the same tall pines, the same faded boathouse leaning slightly toward the water, the same winding dirt path that led down to the dock. But there was something about it this year, something in the air. The water seemed darker, almost too dark, like it was holding on to something beneath the surface. The smell was different too, less fresh, more stagnant, like something underneath had stopped breathing a long time ago. Even the sounds were off. The wind moved differently across the trees, the frogs went silent too quickly, and the ripples on the lake didn't quite match the rhythm of the breeze. It was subtle but unsettling, like a familiar face smiling just a little too wide. The first night, everything felt normal enough. They unpacked, grilled food, and told stories by the fire. The night sky was clear, the stars brilliant, and for a moment it almost felt like the old days. But as the night went on, that calm feeling started to change. It began when the laughter faded, and all that was left was the sound of the lake. The water had a voice of its own, whispering against the shore, soft at first, then stronger. It wasn't just the natural rhythm of waves, it was more deliberate, like breathing, slow, deep, uneven. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but they all heard it. They told themselves it was just the current, the night breeze, the echo of their imagination in the stillness. But they didn't notice how the ripples always moved toward them, even when the wind blew the other way. By the second day, the strangeness grew harder to ignore. The lake felt colder. The air above it held a weight, a chill that didn't belong to summer. One of them, Eli, swore he saw something beneath the surface. Not a fish, not a reflection, a shape. It moved slowly, almost lazily, like it didn't care whether anyone saw it or not. He brushed it off with a nervous laugh, but his eyes didn't match his voice. That evening, when the sun went down, the lake turned black, not dark blue, not shadowed, black. And when the moon rose, the surface didn't shimmer like it always did. It absorbed the light instead, swallowing it whole. On the third night, they lit the old bonfire near the dock, hoping to chase the unease away with noise and warmth. The fire cracked, sparks rose into the sky, and for a while everything felt human again. But that's when they heard it, the faint sound of something moving in the water. Not splashing, not swimming, but dragging, a slow pull, as though something heavy was being moved just below the surface. Eli stood first, squinting toward the dock. The water was still, perfectly still, but there was a ripple spreading outward. It started small, then widened, circling the dock like a heartbeat pulsing from below. They thought maybe an animal had fallen in, but the ripple didn't stop. It kept spreading, reaching the edge of the shore, brushing against the sand where they sat. The firelight reflected off the lake, and for a brief second, they saw something that shouldn't have been there. A pale shape just beneath the surface, unmoving, like a face looking up at them. Eyes open, mouth open. The image vanished with a single ripple, and silence swallowed the night. No one spoke. No one wanted to admit what they'd seen. The next morning, Eli was gone. His sleeping bag was there, his shoes neatly by the door, but his phone lay face down on the deck. Screen cracked, half submerged in a puddle that hadn't been there before. They searched the woods, shouted his name, called the authorities. But when they told the sheriff about the lake, about the face in the water, he just stared at them with something close to pity. "You shouldn't swim in that lake after summer," he said softly. "It doesn't forget what it's taken." The rest of them stayed one more night, though none of them really slept. The air was different now, heavier, wet with fog that clung to their skin. Every creak of the dock sounded like footsteps. Every sound outside felt too close. Around midnight, one of them looked toward the window and froze. The lake was glowing faintly, not bright, not vibrant, just enough to see the faint shimmer of movement below the surface, like something stirring awake. They stood there, watching, and as their eyes adjusted, they saw it, shapes rising slowly through the water, dozens of them. Human shapes, suspended just beneath the surface, their limbs drifting, their faces turned upward toward the house. Then, all at once, the glow vanished. The lake was dark again, as if nothing had happened, but they knew it wasn't over. That night, they packed what they could and drove away before sunrise. They didn't look back. None of them ever returned to that lake house again. Years passed. Life went on. But sometimes, in the stillness of late August, when the air feels too quiet, they each hear it again, the faint whisper of water against the shore, and when they close their eyes, They can still see the black surface rippling toward them, slow and patient. They never found Eli. No body, no trace. Just his phone, with a single photo taken minutes before he disappeared. The picture was blurry, out of focus, but you could still make out the faint outline of something behind him in the water. Some say lakes remember what's fallen into them, that the water keeps every secret, every scream, every breath that never made it back to air. Maybe that's why that lake felt different, because it was full of memories, of voices, of faces that refused to sink. Some places don't want to be left alone at summer's end. And some waters never let go. It was supposed to be their last night together before everyone went their separate ways. The final gathering to mark the end of summer. A simple bonfire near the woods, just like they'd done every year since they were kids. They'd built that fire in the same spot a dozen times before, laughed in the same circle of light, shared the same stories that never seemed to get old, but that night was different, though no one said it out loud. The air carried something heavy, something almost electric, like the forest itself was listening. Even the stars seemed dimmer, swallowed by a haze that clung to the treetops. Still, they told themselves it was just the end of summer blues, the nostalgia that makes you want to hold on to every last second. None of them could have known that by sunrise, that night would be burned into them forever. The fire crackled as they sat around it, the orange glow painting their faces in uneven strokes. They were older now, but in that light, they looked like children again, free, careless, unaware of how fragile the moment really was. They talked about everything and nothing, plans, memories, the stupid dares they used to take when they were braver. The laughter came easily at first, echoing through the trees, but it didn't travel far. The sound just stopped, absorbed by the darkness beyond the clearing. No echo, no return. It was as if the woods were swallowing their voices whole. One of them, Jamie, noticed first. She stopped mid-sentence and stared past the fire. The others followed her gaze, but all they saw were trees, tall black silhouettes against the faint glow of the night sky. But the longer they looked, the more it felt like the trees weren't standing still. Their shadows seemed to bend slightly toward the fire, as though the light was pulling them in. Someone laughed it off, threw another log into the flames, and the moment broke. The conversation picked up again, though quieter now, more forced. The forest had taken its first breath, and it wouldn't be the last. Around midnight the wind shifted. It came from the lake, cold and damp, carrying the smell of something rotten beneath the surface. The fire sputtered, sending a burst of sparks into the air. When the flames steadied again, one of the chairs was empty. They called out, thinking maybe their friend had gone to grab something from the car. No answer. Another called his name, Evan, but the woods gave nothing back. The firelight flickered, and for a second, someone thought they saw him standing between the trees, just a figure, still and distant, barely visible in the dark. They shouted again, but the figure didn't move. Then the fire cracked louder than before, and when they looked again, he was gone. Panic began to crawl its way into their voices. They grabbed flashlights, called out into the woods, their beams slicing through the dark. But no matter how far the light reached, it never seemed enough. The forest felt endless, alive, shifting subtly around them. Every sound, every snapping branch, every crunch of leaves felt deliberate. The deeper they looked, the more the night seemed to push back. Then one of them screamed. The light caught something, a face, or what looked like one, pale, hollow-eyed, expressionless, floating just beyond the reach of the trees. But when they ran closer, there was nothing there, only the scent of smoke and damp earth. They stumbled back toward the clearing, shaken and breathless, trying to convince themselves they'd imagined it. When they reached the fire, the circle was smaller, weaker, the wood collapsing into glowing coals. But it wasn't just the fire that had changed. The shadows were moving differently now, faster, less in rhythm with the flames. They stretched and twisted across the ground, bending around each person as if alive. The shapes in the darkness no longer waited beyond the trees. They were closer, breathing in sync with the crackle of the fire. Someone whispered that they should leave. No one argued. They packed what they could, fumbling in the dim light, desperate to get away from that suffocating silence. That's when the fire flared up on its own, roaring high into the sky, burning with an unnatural light. The flames turned white, and in that brightness they saw them, figures standing just beyond the clearing, dozens of them, unmoving, silent, watching. Their faces were blank, their eyes reflecting the fire like mirrors. The group froze, unable to scream, unable to move. One by one the figures began to step forward, the sound of their feet dragging through the dirt louder than the crackle of the flames. The group ran. They didn't speak, didn't look back. They just ran through the woods, tripping over roots, branches clawing at their skin. Behind them, the sound followed, soft, measured steps, not running, just walking. Slow, certain, the kind of sound that lets you know it doesn't need to hurry to catch you. The woods never ended. Every direction looked the same, every tree a mirror of the last. It was as if the forest had folded in on itself, trapping them inside. Their flashlights flickered one by one, until only the pale glow of the dying moon guided them. Then, out of nowhere, they saw the road, the dirt clearing that led back to the car. Relief hit all at once, until they realized the car doors were open. The inside was soaked, water dripping from the ceiling as though it had been submerged. The seats were wet, cold, and muddy footprints covered the floorboards. None of it made sense. They piled in anyway, slamming the doors, turning the key. But the engine didn't start. Only the radio came alive, static first, then a voice. It was faint, crackling, almost familiar. "Don't look back," it said. And then silence. One of them did. Through the fogged rear window, the fire was still burning. Only now, the figures that had stood in the clearing weren't there. They were closer. The headlights flickered on by themselves, illuminating the road ahead, and for a split second, standing in the beam was a single figure. Evan. He didn't move. He didn't speak. His skin was pale, his eyes empty, his clothes dripping with lake water. He looked at them, and the corners of his mouth twitched upward. Not a smile, not exactly, just a strange, twisted mimic of one. Then the lights went out, and when they turned back on, he was gone. The car engine roared to life on its own, tires spinning as they drove away into the night, too afraid to stop, too afraid to breathe. They never spoke about that night again. Not really. Each of them told a different version of what happened, but none of them ever returned to that place. Years later, when someone mentioned Evan's name, no one could remember where he was buried. No records, no obituary. It was as if he'd never existed at all. But every now and then, when the end of summer comes and the nights grow warm again, someone swears they see a bonfire deep in those same woods, glowing through the fog, and if you listen closely, you can still hear laughter echoing faintly from the flames. The only problem is, it never sounds alive. They called it their last drive of the summer, a spontaneous road trip before everything changed. College, jobs, distance, it all waited just beyond the edge of the season. So they packed into one old car, 4 friends, windows down, music loud, the sky fading from gold to deep blue as the sun gave its final bow. There's something about those nights that feel infinite, the kind where you forget time exists. The road stretched endlessly before them, the kind of road that makes you believe you can drive forever and nothing will ever end. But the thing about endless roads is that they're never truly empty. They remember everyone who's ever driven them. And sometimes they want to be remembered too. It started simple enough. They weren't following a map, just driving, chasing the sunset, letting the turns take them wherever they wanted to go. The signs grew sparser, the towns smaller, until there was nothing but trees on both sides, their shadows swallowing the light from the car's headlights. The air turned heavy, colder than it should have been for summer, and the sky shifted into that strange shade of blue that doesn't belong to day or night. Someone joked that they must have taken a wrong turn. Another said maybe that was the point. None of them realized then that some roads don't appear by accident. A mile or two later, the GPS stopped working, the signal vanished, and their phones went dark. The radio flickered between static and silence. For a while, they didn't care. The laughter kept going, and the headlights carved their path through the dark. But then the road began to change. The lines faded until there were none at all. The asphalt grew rougher, uneven, like it hadn't been driven on in years. Yet it was clear, freshly dry, no weeds, no debris, just blackness stretching into blackness. They should have turned back, but curiosity is stronger than fear when you don't yet know what to fear. The trees began to close in, arching overhead until the road became a tunnel of shadows. The air inside the car grew colder, breath fogged against the glass. The windows started to tremble as though something heavy was moving just outside the car, brushing against the metal. No one said anything at first, pretending not to notice, pretending that silence could make it stop. But the silence grew thicker, pressing into their ears until even the hum of the tires disappeared. And then the radio turned itself on. It wasn't music, it wasn't even static. It was a voice, faint, female, whispering something over and over. None of them could make it out. One leaned forward, turning the dial, trying to clear the signal. The words became clearer, slow, breathy, broken between static bursts. "Don't look at them," it said. "Keep driving." The car swerved slightly as the driver froze, heart pounding. "Who's them?" he muttered. No one answered. They just stared out the windows into the dark. That's when the headlights caught movement, figures standing along the sides of the road, dozens of them, motionless, facing the car. They weren't people, or maybe they were. It was impossible to tell. Their bodies looked wrong, their heads slightly tilted, their arms limp at their sides. The faces were the worst part, blank, like something wearing the memory of a face but not understanding what it meant. The car slowed instinctively. Someone screamed for them not to stop, and the driver slammed his foot down again. The figures didn't move. They just turned their heads slowly as the car passed, their eyes following, gleaming white against the dark. The road kept twisting, looping in ways that didn't make sense. Every turn looked the same. Every curve brought them back to the same stretch of road, lined with those same motionless figures. One of them checked the dashboard clock, realizing it hadn't changed in over an hour. The air inside the car felt suffocating now, thick with something that wasn't quite fog. The headlights flickered, and the driver began to panic. He swore the car was slowing on its own. The speedometer still read 50, but the trees outside moved slower and slower, until it felt like they weren't moving at all. Then the fog rolled in. It swallowed everything, the road, the forest, even the air itself. They could barely see a few feet ahead. The radio cut off, and in the silence, they heard it, soft footsteps outside pacing around the car. They weren't alone. One of them whispered to roll up the windows, another to stay still. The footsteps circled the car twice, slow, deliberate, dragging against the gravel. When they stopped, no one breathed. Then something tapped the glass, just once, a light, polite knock. The driver flicked the high beams on instinct, and for a split second, they saw a face right outside the windshield, pale, hollow-eyed, smiling wide enough to split the skin at the corners. The scream was instant. The tires screeched, the car spun, and they tore through the fog blindly, hearts pounding in unison. When the road finally cleared, they were shaking, covered in cold sweat. The trees opened up again, and ahead of them stood a sign they didn't recognize. It was old, bent, covered in rust. It read, "Now leaving Echo Hollow." None of them remembered entering any town by that name. They drove until they saw familiar lights again, until the stars looked real, until the air felt warm. When they finally stopped at a gas station, it was nearly dawn. The attendant gave them a strange look when they stumbled inside. They must have looked wild, white-faced, trembling, silent. When they asked where Echo Hollow was, the man froze, then shook his head slowly. "That road's been closed for 50 years, he said. "Flood washed it out. Ain't been a town there since the 60s. They left without saying another word. They didn't speak the whole drive back, but later, when one of them looked through his phone, trying to piece together what had happened, he found something that made his blood run cold. In his gallery, between random photos of the trip, there was one he didn't remember taking. It was black and white, grainy, taken from the passenger seat. It showed the road, the trees, and in the beam of the headlights, those same figures standing along the sides. Except this time one of them was closer, right in front of the car. They say roads are like memories. Some lead you back, others lead you astray, and a few were never meant to be found again. Maybe Echo Hollow never disappeared. Maybe it just waits, waiting for another group to take a wrong turn, to ignore the signs, to follow the call of the open road one last time. Because some roads don't lead anywhere at all. Some roads lead back to you. The strange thing about fear is that it never really leaves. It hides, it lingers, it waits for the right silence to crawl back in. You can convince yourself it's gone. You can drown it in laughter, smother it in light, bury it beneath noise and comfort. But deep down, it's always there. Fear is patient. It doesn't fade with time. It simply learns how to wait. And when the right moment comes, when the night stretched too long and the world falls quiet again, it returns. That's what they never understood. The horrors of that summer didn't end with the season. They were just sleeping, waiting for the second coming. Every year, it starts the same way. The air turns colder, the evenings darker, and that same stillness creeps back into the corners of the world. At first, it feels like nostalgia, the kind that makes you think of laughter, bonfires, the way the lake shimmered under a golden sun. But nostalgia is dangerous. It blurs the truth. It makes you forget that even beauty can rot, that even joy leaves ghosts behind. The people who lived through those nights, the lake house, the road, the bonfire, they tried to move on. They built lives, families, futures. But fear doesn't forget names. It follows quietly, slipping through cracks, whispering in the places light can't reach. It began again on a night that should have meant nothing. One of them woke to the sound of dripping water. Not rain, something slower, more deliberate. It came from the ceiling above, steady as a heartbeat. When they looked up, the plaster was wet, forming a dark spot that pulsed faintly with each drop, and just before they could blink, a ripple moved through it, like something pressing from the other side. By morning it was gone. They told themselves it was just a leak, but deep down they knew better. Water has a way of remembering where it's been. Another had dreams, the kind that don't feel like dreams at all. In them, he was back on that road, the headlights cutting through the fog, the radio whispering words he couldn't make out. Only this time, when he woke up, he'd find his car keys on the nightstand, damp, covered in a thin layer of dirt. The smell of wet asphalt clung to them. He threw them away once, even changed locks, but they'd always return, resting by his bed as if the road was waiting for him to drive it again. And then there were the others. The ones who never spoke about what happened, but carried the silence like a curse. One swore she could still hear the fire. Not see it, not smell it, just hear it. The soft crackle, the low hiss of burning wood, faint and steady somewhere in the distance. At first, she thought it was in her head, a sound memory echoing through time. But then one night she followed it, stepping barefoot into her backyard, drawn toward the noise. The air was cold, but she could feel the heat. And there, in the center of the yard, where the grass had always been damp and green, was a circle of scorched earth, smoke rising without a spark. They began to reach out to each other again, hesitantly, through messages and broken phone calls. No one wanted to say it aloud, but they all felt it, the return, the sense that something was coming back around, that maybe it had never left. They tried to reason with it. Maybe trauma lingers in strange ways. Maybe memories twist. But deep down, they knew this wasn't memory. It was something older, colder, deliberate. It was fear reclaiming what it had touched once before. One night, they met again, in the same small town where it had all started years ago. They sat in a diner that smelled of burnt coffee and rain-soaked pavement, talking in low voices about things they swore they'd buried. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, the kind that doesn't break the sky but rattles deep in the ground. When the lights flickered, no one reacted. They just looked at one another, silently accepting that the world was starting to tilt again. It wasn't coincidence, it was invitation. The past had found its way back, step by step, like something retracing its footprints. Every sound, every whisper, every shadow they'd ignored had led them to that moment. The waitress brought their check, her hands trembling as she placed it on the table. She didn't say a word. But scrawled across the receipt, in handwriting none of them recognized, were 3 words. Still waiting here. They left without paying, without speaking, their hearts hammering in unison. Outside, the rain had started, cold, thick, relentless. It fell in sheets that blurred the road ahead. But even through the downpour, they could see it. The shape. A figure standing across the street, half shadowed by the flickering glow of a dying streetlight. It wasn't moving, not at first, just watching, and when lightning tore through the sky for a split second, they saw its face. Pale, dripping, smiling through the storm. They ran, not together this time, not in one direction. Each of them went their own way, desperate to escape something that didn't need to chase. Fear doesn't run, it waits, it lingers in the corners of your home, in the reflection on the glass, in the silence between the hum of the refrigerator and your own heartbeat. It doesn't have to catch you to consume you. It just has to remind you that it's there. As the days passed, they each began to see signs of it returning. The shadows in their mirrors stretched too far. Their voices echoed in rooms that were too small to hold echoes. And at night, just before sleep, they'd feel it, the air growing heavier, the pressure behind their ribs building until it felt like something inside them was trying to get out. Fear changes you. It rewrites the rhythm of your body, teaches your soul to flinch at things no one else can hear. And then, just as it had come, it faded again. The noises stopped. The dreams went quiet, the shadows stayed still. But peace didn't return, not really. Because peace isn't the absence of fear, it's the space it leaves behind, the waiting, the knowing that it's not over, that it will come again, when the nights are longest, when the laughter dies, when the light begins to fade. That's what the second coming means. Not an arrival, but a reminder. Fear reborn, stronger, wiser, carrying the memory of every scream it's ever drawn from human lips. Because fear doesn't end when the story does. It circles back again and again, waiting for the silence to grow deep enough to hold it. It waits in the cracks between seasons, in the stillness before the first cold wind. And when you feel that same chill creep through your bones at summer's end, when you swear the shadows are moving just a little closer, remember this: fear never leaves. It just comes home. When the warmth begins to fade, and the air starts to carry that first bite of cold, there's something about the world that feels quieter, emptier. It's not just the change of weather, it's something deeper. The trees go still, the birds vanish without a sound, and even the wind seems to hesitate before it moves. That silence isn't peace, it's a pause, a held breath, as if everything around you is waiting for something you can't see. You tell yourself it's just the season changing, that the world is only shifting gears, but somewhere deep inside, there's this feeling that it's more than that, like something old is moving again, something that waits for the end of summer because it can only exist when the light begins to die. It's strange how the silence after the heat carries a different kind of weight. During summer, the nights are alive, crickets, laughter, engines humming down distant roads. But when it ends, all of that sound fades at once, leaving behind a stillness that doesn't feel natural. It's almost like the world is holding its breath, bracing for what comes next. And if you stand outside long enough during that first cold night, you can feel it too. The pressure in the air, the way the ground feels hollow beneath your feet, as if something beneath the surface has started to stir. The people who lived through those stories, the lake house, the bonfire, the endless road, they always said that the silence was worse than the screams. Because after everything, after the fear, the panic, the running, it was the quiet that haunted them most. The nights when nothing moved, when even their own thoughts felt too loud. They said that's when it felt closest. That's when they knew whatever it was hadn't gone. It was watching, waiting, breathing in rhythm with the world as it shifted from warmth to cold. One of them, years later, couldn't sleep during late August anymore. He'd leave his windows open, listening to the world outside, and every year it was the same. The first night the cicadas stopped singing, he'd wake up at exactly 3:07 a.m. The room would feel colder, heavier, and just before he could convince himself it was all in his head, he'd hear it. The soft sound of someone walking across his porch, not fast, not slow, just pacing back and forth, the boards creaking beneath each step. He'd never check, never move, just lie there staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. It always did, right before sunrise. But the footsteps always came back when the nights turned cold again. Another survivor, years after the lake house incident, told her husband that the water still called her name. He'd laugh it off, until one night, when they were both awake, they heard it together, a whisper that came through the open window carried by the wind, soft but clear. It was her voice, calling out from the lake that wasn't anywhere near them anymore. She said the air always smelled like wet soil and old wood when it happened, like the lake was reaching out to remind her that it hadn't forgotten. And each year, the voice grew closer, until it wasn't outside the house anymore. It was right there, at the foot of the bed. They all tried to move forward, but every end of summer something came back. It wasn't loud or violent, it was subtle. A reflection in a dark window that moved when they didn't, a whisper in the drain when the shower ran cold, the smell of burnt wood when there was no fire. Tiny reminders that fear doesn't vanish with time, it just waits for the right silence. You see, the world has rhythms we've forgotten how to hear. We think of silence as nothingness, but in truth, it's a signal. Nature doesn't grow quiet unless it senses something. Something bigger, older, closer. The animals flee before storms, the trees still before earthquakes. And maybe the silence after summer is the world's way of warning us that something unseen is near. Because it always begins the same way. The air thickens, the night deepens, and then, just when everything feels too still to be real, the first noise returns. Not from you, not from the world, but from something else. A crack in the woods, a whisper through the window. The kind of sound that makes your skin tighten because it doesn't belong. One autumn, a man in a small town stayed behind to close the summer cabins before winter. It was a simple job: board the windows, drain the pipes, lock the doors. The others had already left, but as the sun went down, he noticed something strange. Every door he locked would be open again when he came back around. He thought it was vandals, maybe kids messing around. But when he started marking the doors with chalk, he saw it. Each mark was smeared from the inside, not wiped clean, smudged, as if fingers had dragged across the wood, slow and deliberate. He left before finishing the job. When they found the cabins months later, every one of them was locked from the inside. That's the kind of silence that creeps in after the heat dies. The kind that hides things behind stillness. The kind that feels like the world isn't empty, just waiting. And every end of summer, people feel it without realizing what it is. They say the air feels heavier. They say their homes creak more at night. They say their dreams grow darker. They call it seasonal change. But maybe it's something older than the seasons. Maybe it's the part of the year when the world itself forgets to breathe, because every ending needs something to fill the space it leaves behind. And when the sun retreats and the warmth fades, something else comes forward to claim it. Something that feeds on quiet. Something that moves in the absence of sound. That's why, when you stand outside on those cold, still nights, and you feel that pressure against your skin, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath, you shouldn't stay too long. The silence isn't empty. It's listening. The survivors of those horrors understood that far too late. They thought once the screams stopped, they were safe. But safety doesn't come with silence. It never has. Because silence is what comes after the struggle, after the fire burns out, after the road ends. It's what fills the void left behind when everything else is gone. And sometimes, the thing that moves in afterward isn't peace. It's what's been waiting for you to stop making noise long enough for it to step in. So when the nights grow colder, and the air stands still, and even the insects refuse to sing, remember that the world isn't resting. It's watching. It's holding its breath, waiting for the moment to exhale something ancient back into the dark. The silence after the heat isn't a calm, it's a warning. The end of one season is the awakening of another, and the chill you feel crawling up your spine when the last warmth of summer fades, it isn't the weather changing, it's something else, coming back.